Welcome to the Des Moines Storytellers project. It is so great to see so many of you out here tonight for an evening of live storytelling. I'm Rekha Basu, and I'm a 30-year columnist, give or take a year or two, with the Des Moines Register. Thank you. Thank you so much. On to tonight's topic, bad advice. I think we all know a little something about that subject. Sometimes it's the bad counsel we give ourselves, and sometimes it's bad advice we got or that we gave someone else. Speaking personally, sometimes it goes like this. Sure, why not quit our beloved jobs in Iowa, yank the kids out of school at their most impressionable stages, and move to this foreign culture that is the state of Florida? That didn't last long. But sometimes, as some of tonight's stories will show you, you can rebound. Here we are back again. You're in for a treat tonight as 5 very different people share their experiences of bad advice. Their willingness to do so, even when it makes them look bad or forces them to laugh at themselves, is what makes these evenings so compelling. So, please turn off your cell phones and let's give them all a round of applause. Our first storyteller tonight is Galit Freylack, who will share a story of an unexpected turn in her childhood and its impact.
I was 3 years old when I came to America for the very first time. My mom, a Jewish girl from here in Des Moines, met my dad, an Israeli lifeguard, on the beach as she attended Tel Aviv University on scholarship. And it was in Israel that they fell in love and got married and then conceived me, although I'm not sure in what particular order. But on March 1st, 1970, I was welcomed into this world on my mother's very own 20th birthday. Now, we lived in Israel, but in 1973, it was decided that we would come here to Des Moines for a visit so that my dad and I could meet my mom's parents for the very first time. Despite the original plan and my father's wishes to return to Israel, this visit became permanent, and it created a new home for us here in the U.S. This was a very scary time for me, and I clung to my parents and anything that felt familiar. This was a whole new country with a whole new language to learn. My dad, who spoke no English when we arrived, had a very traditional sense of family, and he wanted a wife that would stay home and cook and clean and raise babies. My mother, coming from a family that really emphasized education, wanted to further hers and then pursue a career. And it was because of this difference, among many others about their future, that they divorced just 1 year later when I was 4 years old. Now it was not only a new country, but a new style of family as well. After my parents split, I spent much of my existence bouncing around between my mom's and my grandparents' and my dad's homes. And although there was so much love, this new lifestyle created a sense of ungroundedness and confusion and even insecurity within me. I primarily lived with my mom and my grandparents, but I spent every Saturday with my dad. And we would typically go to a movie, many of which were not age appropriate. Or we would go toy store shopping, or just walk the Merle Hay Mall. And I can remember my dad in his favorite faded bell-bottom jeans with a plaid shirt and an open vest, and what I would most definitely consider platform cowboy boots. I have a very short family. And I can recall his long, black, curly hair flowing from underneath his paperboy cap and maybe a gold chain or two around his neck. Now, once or twice a month, I would spend the weekend with my dad. And one particular weekend in December of 1975, as he was returning me home from a weekend stay, he stopped me as I was gathering my things, and he lit a Marlboro Red cigarette with a match, and that sweet smell of the combination of sulfur mixed with the first light of tobacco filled the air of the closed windowed car. And he asked me, Galit, do you miss your Savta and Saba, which is grandma and grandpa in Hebrew? Yes, I replied, I did miss them very much. And then he asked me if I wanted to go see them. And I responded again with a yes, although I'm not sure that I meant it, because even at 5 years old, I had a sense of what that may entail. And then he put his arm on mine and he said, Mote, which is sweetheart in Hebrew. The next time that you come and stay with me, I want you to pack some extra things. And do me a favor. Don't tell anybody about this conversation. Let's just keep this between you and me. Now, my dad didn't have to say anything more. I knew what he meant. We were going to Israel, just the two of us. And although externally I agreed, internally I questioned. And it was in that moment, on that cold winter's day, in that car in front of my safe place, that I did something that would change the trajectory of my life. I agreed to something, not because I wanted to do it, but because somebody else wanted me to. I didn't answer from my heart or my soul. I answered from my fear. And so became a pattern of listening to my own bad advice. Now the day rolled around, and I had done what I was asked, and I had told no one of the conversation. And the internal dissonance within me was swirling around like a carnival ride. Inside, I felt like I was on the tilt-a-whirl at the Iowa State Fair or the silly silo at Adventureland. You see, I really hoped my dad had changed his mind. But as we drove to the airport, I could tell that he hadn't. And the minutes felt like hours, and it was as if life was in slow motion. We boarded a plane, and then another plane, and then finally the flight to Israel, and the array of emotions inside me were overwhelming. I was literally torn because this plane was taking me somewhere that I barely remembered being before, and it was taking me away from everything that I had only recently come to know as home. I didn't want to leave my mom or my grandparents or my new friends, but I also didn't want to disappoint my dad. There was a soothing distraction in the cabin as my fellow travelers chatted in English and other languages, and maybe languages that I didn't know, or at least I could no longer remember. But my dad got me tucked in my little yellow felt onesie pajamas with literally the plastic soles and the button-up tushy, and eventually he tucked me in, and I did fall fast asleep. We arrived in Israel, and it literally felt so far away. But there was a faint familiarity in the air, and it was the combination of sea salt mixed with diesel fuel from the cars and the buses and the trucks, and one of my favorite foods to this day, fried falafel. And although my soul did recognize this place, my heart was still nearly 6,500 miles away. We arrived at my Savta and Saba's apartment in Old Tel Aviv, and we opened the gate into the garden. And as I walked up the stairs that my feet hadn't touched since I was 3 years old, I remember studying the pebbles and the steps of the only home that I could barely recall knowing there. And it was simultaneously familiar yet foreign. Now, this was a surprise visit to my Savta and Saba, and my Savta pinched my cheeks as only a grandmother could until it was painful, and they kissed me all over my face until I was probably soaking wet. Ew. And clearly, I couldn't necessarily understand everything that they were saying, but the love was palpable. Internally, I was vacillating between feelings of excitement and adventure and a deep-seated, gut-wrenching homesickness. It didn't take long until my family on both sides of the globe realized this was not an approved visit, but what would be considered a kidnapping. As you can imagine, the energy shifted, and I could feel the tension in the air, and I knew that my father was truly doing what he felt was best for me, and at the same time, that my family was not in agreement, and they were encouraging him to send me back home. Within a day or two, I was able to speak with my mom on the phone, and somewhere in the midst of her frantic desperation, in a calm and quiet voice, she asked me, "Galiti, do you want to come home?" "Yes," I immediately responded, and this yes had no hesitation. It had no resistance. This yes resonated with every pore in my being. There was no doubt, and there was no fear. And so it was, after negotiations with my family and the State Department here in Iowa, after a short time, I was sent back home to America with an airline-appointed escort, just me, a 5-year-old, traveling across the world with strangers. But this trip felt safe, and this trip felt right. And it was made more enjoyable with frequent visits to each of the cockpits on every plane and a countless number of plastic airline wing pins that they used to give away. As my final escort and I landed in Des Moines and exited the plane and walked off the runway, the smell of diesel fuel began to fade, and it was replaced with the now familiar scent of that cold winter Iowan air. And awaiting me in the airport were 3 sets of loving eyes and 6 arms open wide, ready to hold me tight. And my mother and my grandparents and I embraced for what seemed like forever, and they cried tears of relief and of gratitude. And in all reality, I can't remember if I shed even one. I was home, but this series of events would forever change me, and it would change the way that I approached my life for many, many years to come. I don't regret or resent my father for taking me to Israel. And as a matter of fact, my mom and my dad and I, we all have wonderful relationships with one another today, many years later. And I don't regret any of my life experiences, no matter how joyful or painful or challenging that they've been, because I know that they've molded me into who I am today. But I can look back on my life and I can see patterns that were rooted in this experience and the ones I've shared with you tonight. And I can see the many times that I put someone else's happiness in front of my own. I can see the many situations ranging from jobs to relationships where I stayed for far too long because I didn't want to hurt someone or disappoint them or let them down. I can see the many times that I didn't listen to my gut, and that, in my opinion, is some of the worst advice that one can take. It's a lifelong journey to learn how to navigate the waters and the storms of this earthly experience, but each day is an opportunity to learn, and it's an opportunity to grow in self-confidence and in trust and in courage. Each day is an opportunity for me to listen to my intuition and then act accordingly. Now, some days I do better than others, but I'm not going to stop trying now. Each day, I try to discern my own bad advice and my own best advice. And it's the same wish that I have for each and every one of you. Thank you.
Our second storyteller is Rick Kievits, a Dutch native who will share a story of crossing continents when he just wanted to be home.
January 7, 2008 marked one of the high and low points in my life. High, because I was in a plane in the sky. Low, because I was detained and eventually deported out of the US. There I was, with an officer on my left side holding my passport, walking me through a full airplane, all the way to the back. These are big airplanes, which made for a long, humiliating walk. To this day, I remember the eyes of people looking at me. When we got to my seat, the officer informed me he had given my passport to a steward on the flight, and I was not to get my passport back until at least half the flight was complete, just in case. I left the US without a passport, devastated, and my dream totally crushed. Now you are probably wondering, what did I do to get myself into this situation? Let me explain. I was born and raised in the Netherlands and arrived here in Iowa at the age of 17 as a foreign exchange student. While in the Netherlands, I went through several significant events at a young age, and I ended up in foster care at the age of 13. After graduating high school at the age of 17, my foster family asked me whether I wanted to do a foreign exchange year. Given that foster care ends at the age of 18, and I would have to be on my own anyway, being in a different country seemed like a good preparation and a fun adventure. Of course, I thought. Where to? The US, obviously. I entered the US on August 10, 2006, with a program, a 10-month visa, and a couple of suitcases, ready to take on the world. During my stay in Iowa, I got a new appreciation for myself, and I felt a sense of freedom. It was as though all the baggage I had been carrying with me my entire life in the Netherlands was taken off my shoulders. It still existed, but it was as though I was able to put it down and almost ignore it entirely during my stay. I played soccer during my exchange, and slowly colleges started to reach out. This turned into scholarships. I decided I wanted to stay close to where I'd lived that year and enrolled in the college there. At this point in my life, I had not been at a higher high. I was determined to stay, and I would do anything to make that happen. And with that, I mean anything. Now, of course, there were several roadblocks yet to overcome. One was delivering the news back home, and the other was obtaining a new visa. When I delivered the news back home, my foster family and my mom were extremely excited. They were very aware that this was a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity for me. My dad was excited, but wanted to play a role in how this would go down. My dad and I do not have a good relationship, And I was 18 with a goal in mind, so I was ready to reject whatever advice he had to give. During spring of that year, it was time for me to enroll in the college. First was working with the director of international studies of my college to obtain the paperwork necessary to submit a new visa application. Originally, the plan was to take this paperwork, travel back home to the Netherlands, schedule an appointment with the US Embassy in Amsterdam, and submit my visa application then. This was the plan, until the director of international studies had given me advice that I would be able to submit my visa application while in the US. This meant I would not need to leave the country. Just what I wanted. This was the first piece of bad advice I accepted. I accepted this advice because I assumed the director of international studies knew what he was talking about. And more so, I accepted it because I was worried that leaving the US would lead the process to fall apart, which would mean the end of my dream. Leaving the US would add steps to the process, and whenever steps are added, more could go wrong. Staying felt like a shortcut. When I told people back home that I changed my plans, they were worried. My father, as well as the director of my foreign exchange program, told me I was required to leave the United States prior to my visa expiration, and I would have to submit a new visa application in the Netherlands. This is where, then I got an email from the director of my foreign exchange program. His email ended by saying, "I strongly advise you to return to the Netherlands as originally planned and await your visa application while here." This is where things got interesting in a hurry. It was very confrontational. You remember my life, my dream, and my mindset at this point. I was determined to stay, and I was determined to take the steps that felt easiest toward achieving my dream. It was also during this time that I was reminded of that baggage I had put down. I looked at it, and I was not ready to be confronted with that yet. I liked the light feel of my life here. So, I accepted the advice from the director of international studies, and I rejected the good advice. I stayed in the country. During fall that year, it was time for me to enroll in the class, join the soccer team, and everything appeared okay. I had booked flights to go back home to the Netherlands to visit family over Christmas, and I left the US on December 17, 2007. On December 18, the day after my departure, I received notice that my visa application had been denied. I later learned my visa application had actually been denied sometime in November. When visas are denied, you have 15 days to leave the country. So, I had already violated this. When I received the notice of my visa application being denied, I remembered thinking, oh, well, that sucks. I mean, I was disappointed, but I figured at that point in my life, my whole life felt like a fight up to that point, and I was ready to fight this as well. So, what's next? Well, while in the Netherlands, I received advice from an attorney in the US, not an immigration attorney, who told me to return back to the US as originally planned. I would be able to enter the US as a visitor for up to 90 days, and I could then fight my denied visa application while in the country. That was the second piece of bad advice I accepted. I entered the US on January 7, 2008, as if nothing had happened. Well, it was as though the authorities in Minneapolis were expecting me. I was immediately detained by several Homeland Security officers who took me and my luggage aside into a separate room, eventually into an even smaller room. Think of this room as a cell, but with a desk and a monitor for the personnel interviewing me. I had to put my right hand up and swear I would speak the truth. I was in this room for about 8 hours, during which I was interviewed, questioned, and they went through my email. I remember sitting in a chair with my head down, hands in my hair, crying. When it was time for me to go to the bathroom, an officer had to come get me, escort me, keep an eye on me, and escort me back. Worst was when it was time for me to board the plane. An officer escorted me to the boarding gate. Boarding went as follows: gold members, first class, comfort, up until basic economy. That day I learned something else. There's another boarding group after basic economy. And that's the group of deports. Which really isn't much of a group. It was just me. And that's when I took my long, humiliating walk to the back of the plane. Humiliated, crushed, exhausted, hopeless. There went my dream. There went my future. I was at a low. 30 hours after leaving the Netherlands, I arrived back in Amsterdam airport. It took me a while to have clarity, to find energy, to have positive outlook. For the first few days, I cried and remained in disbelief about what had taken place. Would I ever see anyone in the US again? After a couple days, I started going to the gym to get some routine in my schedule and clear my mind. Shortly after, I received an email from another US soccer college coach who I'd once been in touch with prior to my departure. He had an interest in bringing me on, had learned what had happened to me, and was determined to help. My dream felt like a possibility again. For the next few months, we emailed each other back and forth. He took care of everything I needed to schedule another appointment with the US Embassy in Amsterdam and submit a new visa application. After my appointment at the US Embassy, it was time for me to wait for my passport with new visa to arrive in the mail. This is all I could think about for weeks. Then it finally arrived. I remember sitting on my bed holding the white envelope. I tore open the envelope, took out the passport, and I started looking for my new visa with excitement and anxiety. I dropped my passport. I couldn't find it. All I found was the visa that had a canceled stamp on it. How could this keep happening to me? Where is my visa? After a few moments, I picked my passport up one more time and took one desperate attempt looking for my new visa once more. There it was, my new visa. What a relief. And what a roller coaster. On April 20th, 2008, 3 months after deportation, I arrived back in the US. 14 years later, you'll be happy to know I'm still here with all the right paperwork. Back when I was 18, I let my personal desires cloud my judgment. I accepted the bad advice because it felt good and easy. And I rejected the good advice because it seemed to conflict with my personal desires. Now, I have learned there's no shortcuts to any place worth going. When I receive advice these days, I listen to my gut and do some research. Lastly, this story reminds me that there's people out there who are willing to fight for us, and that gives me faith. Thank you.
And now it's my pleasure to introduce Kiranmai Yarlagadda, our third storyteller this evening, who will tell a story about juggling different kinds of advice in her life.
My father was a widower when he married my mom. She was a teacher and a self-made woman, a reason why he married her against his family's wishes. When I was about 11 years old, my sister and myself visited for the first time and went to my paternal grandparents' house. My grandmother took me around, introducing me as my dad's second wife's daughter. My mom's friends, on the other hand, has a different opinion. I'm too dark-skinned to be her daughter. I'm confused. If I'm not recognized to be my father's daughter by my own family members, and if I'm too dark-skinned to be my mom's daughter, who am I really? I'm this shy, introvert girl walking with invisible wounds from colorism, culture, and insensitive comments made by people in the community. Growing up in the South Indian culture, there is this Telugu phrase which has become part of my being and has played a huge role in my life. Guppita moosinanta kalame neeku viluva untundi. Guppita means fist, kalame means time, and viluva means respect. It summarizes that a person's value and respect holds in holding the truth behind their closed fist. So, worried of my losing my respect, I decided to keep everything to myself, and I did not even express my concerns to even my parents. Under these circumstances, at the age of 16, I was already preparing for my medical entrance exams. I was this highly focused academic kid and not very social. It's not like I don't like to have fun. I do, like any other teenager, but I was constantly terrified to attract any unnecessary attention. Then one day, my teacher told my parents not to worry about my academics. He told them, she's smart. If not this year, she will get into medical school next year. But once she does that, making meaningful connections with her patients is the most important thing. Please, please encourage her to be more open and communicating. I took my teacher very seriously, but I also realized that his advice is in direct conflict with the way that I am being raised to hold my truths behind the closed fist. So I had to choose one advice over the other, or I had to find a middle ground. For many years, I was constantly pulled in different directions, trying to adapt to one advice over the other. Focusing myself to become a good, confident speaker. I was also primarily focused on my academics. I met some good friends in college, in my medical school, who respected me for the person that I am and not for the way I looked. So by the time I graduated out of medical school at the age of 25, I feel beautiful and confident. Now, suddenly everything changed for everyone around me. Getting me married on time became the most important thing. Everyone in the family and the friends who looked up to me for my academic success so far started to expect and advise that my future husband and his family are going to be my top priority in life. My dreams and my career will only come later on. My world shifted yet again with this unknown discomfort in my heart. I was strongly determined to balance my personal and professional lives. So I went on with this arranged marriage. with the person that I met for the first time on the day of my engagement. Within 2 weeks after I got married, I was in United States for the first time on August 30th, 2001. Balancing the personal and the professional life was not as easy as I had imagined it to be. Little did I know that someone else and their problems and their insecurities are going to be my priority over my own life, my own career, and my own dreams. I just felt very emotionally neglected. For the first time in life, I failed my exams. Not once, but multiple times. It took me so many years, and over the years, I felt emotionally and physically drained. And I felt stuck and victimized. Then in 2005, something beautiful happened, and I started seeing hope in my life. On this one winter stormy night, I got admitted into the hospital, and as the night transformed into the day, and with this beautiful snow surrounded around me, in the parking lots and everywhere in the landscape, I just gave birth to my daughter. And I knew that minute, things are going to change, and for good. However, the change didn't happen immediately or overnight. I had to first come to terms with my failures and my own feelings of emotional neglect. So I focused myself on my exams and worked hard once again and passed the US medical licensing exams, and also got multiple interviews to get into residency. However, I did not match, and I was not selected for any of those programs. As I continued to struggle, in 2014, I received a call from my daughter's teacher who showed me her 3rd grade reading and comprehension score report. Shocked to see that she was at 8th grade proficient level, which is also equivalent to a basic 11th grade level, I went home trying to comprehend the information. It dawned on me, in trying to balance my personal and professional lives, I was self-absorbed with my own problems, and I did not really pay attention to her academic needs. It was a wake-up call for me. Just to take pause at everything that I'm doing and just work with her, and to attend her emotional, personal, and intellectual needs. She became my first priority. The experiences that I gained from my failures became the blueprint to guide her. In return, I found my inner voice, my strengths, and my own weaknesses. I shared my childhood stories of social importance, and in return, she surprised me and inspired me with her drive to help the adolescent girls in India get the educational tools to fight against child marriages. She was 10. Together, we both made change-making our way of living, and together we learned that networking and storytelling are really important in life. In past 6 years, more than 500 girls in India have benefited out of this program. Then one day I asked a question to myself. If I'm able to research, find the right person, go ask for help, and get the information to go back and guide my daughter and other people, why am I not doing that for myself? The answer was very clear. I was ashamed of my failures. The feelings from the emotional neglect that I feel and the constant need for validation cropping from it were dragging me behind. The guilt from not attending to my daughter in her growing up years were weighing me down. So I didn't know anymore what I wanted in life. I'm yet to find the purpose in my life, which is why I started taking every opportunity that came across my way and started to learn from them. The rich experiences of raising a young change maker have now become blueprint to find my why in my life and also to help many other youth. During the pandemic 2020 lockdown, when the entire world has put a pause, I decided to click the reset button and restart my life from where I left off in 2014. In partnership with a nonprofit organization, I started a Young Changemakers program for middle and high school students across the country, ran a TED Club for them, and these kids went on to fundraise during the lockdown and donated more than 700 devices to 14 Title I schools in 8 states across the United States. This work led me to be selected for and graduate out of the 2022 Community Leadership Program at the Greater Des Moines Leadership Institute. As I continued this journey and my new journey as an avid meditator, 3 things surfaced out of my subconscious mind. The childhood experiences from colorism were the root cause for my constant need for validation. It's not needed anymore. Number 2, vulnerability and transparency are the key to success. This was what was missing from my residency applications back then. My failures and the story I wrote for my application and the interview answers I gave, they're all different, not matching. And the interviewers could clearly see that I'm very insecure. Once I brought these 2 ingredients into my life, I started meeting the right people in my life who went on to become my mentors. and I was able to break the bad advice and find my middle ground. Number 3, I found my why. Just to design my life around medicine, change-making, and storytelling so I can learn, share, and heal. So today, August 30th, 2022, marks 21 years of the first time that I entered United States. All the people that I have met so far, the experiences that I had, and the situations that I was put into, everything taught me to be the person that I am today. I'm still this shy introvert girl. The only difference, I walk around with colorful bandages, and I'm not ashamed or afraid of showing them to anybody. I fondly call myself a trained extrovert and a self-trained storyteller. I might have become a change maker by chance, thanks to my daughter, but I am a lifelong learner by choice. I never was a victim to start with, and never will be. Thank you.
Now, it's my great pleasure to introduce my dear friend, Julie Gammack, with a story about leaving something you love. Please welcome Julie.
Well, 30 years ago, I made the most difficult decision in my life. I walked away from one of the best jobs in the world. Some of you may remember, I was a columnist for the Des Moines Register 30 years ago. Now that surprised me. Anyway, thank you. So why would somebody do that? I mean, being a columnist for the Des Moines Register is really a cool job. We get to ask all kinds of nosy questions, and we get invited to all kinds of really cool things. And it's actually quite glamorous. In fact, as an example, the Iowa State Fair invites us to be part of the celebrity cow chip throwing contest. I can tell by the response you might know what that is, but for those of you who don't, a cow chip is a disc of dried cow shit. And we stand up on one of the hills at the fairgrounds, and we fling it as far as we can. Now, there's a skill set for you. I think if I really had to, I could probably get it as far as the third row. Anyway, I never won. But that's a part of what it was like to be a columnist for the Des Moines Register. Oh, there's more where that came from. Anyway, that's not what we're here to talk about tonight. We're here to talk about why I left my job at the Des Moines Register 30 years ago. So what was going on? Well, I'm a legacy hire for the Register. My dad had been a war correspondent who covered World War II, Korea, and Vietnam. Yeah, he was a great guy. He was also a daily columnist. But despite that legacy, I never pictured that I would follow in his footsteps. Because as a kid, I had two real phobias in life. The first was writing. I'm not kidding. I had a real phobia about writing. It might have had something to do with a father who was pretty famous as a writer. And the second phobia I had was public speaking. So what did I do in life? I became a talk radio host on WHO radio. Some of you remember. And then joined the Des Moines Register. Well, it was a great job. And I was able to make it all the way until I turned 40. And I looked around the newsroom, having turned 40, and having led a rather adventuresome life up until turning 40. And I realized that I was 40. And that meant that I had the possibility of spending the next 25 years doing the same thing every day. Routine. I mean, it wasn't an easy job, but it did have some routine to it, and it was predictable. But I tried on the idea, and I loved the newsroom. I'd been a copy kid in the building when I was 16. I loved the place. I loved the people in it. I still do. And I really thought about it, because if you're going to leave and have a new career, 40 is about the time that you probably better move on. But I came to the conclusion that I loved that job and that I was going to do that until I retired. And this sense of calm and peace came over me. I'd made my decision. Well, fast forward, 1992, U.S. Senator Tom Harkin decided he was going to run for president. Well, I'd worked for Tom in 1974 as a kid when he first was elected to Congress. And he won, and we all went off to Washington, and I brought my dog and lived on Capitol Hill, and I was then 25, and I was going to change the world. Well, I had the job of being a congressional secretary or scheduler. Now, some of you might not know about me is that I'm not really a detail-oriented person. And a congressman's scheduler needs to have the right date, the right place, and the right time on a schedule card. Sometimes it wasn't always to be. Anyway, I decided that it wasn't a good fit, and I came back to Iowa. And I lurched around and did a bunch of stuff before joining WHO radio and then the Register. So there was quite a long gap between being 1974 and 1992 when Tom decided to run. We were both in very different orbits. He was a United States Senator, and I was a columnist for the Register. But when that call came, did I want to go to work on that campaign? My first thought was, absolutely. I mean, how many times do you know someone who's running for the presidency? And of course, then there's the head kicks in. And there I was with a single parent with health care and a salary and a 401k. And so then that voice in your head says, maybe you better not. And I thought, well, I'll seek advice. That's our topic tonight. And I talked to lots of people I admired, people I respected, along with the freest free spirits I know. And everyone said, don't do it. My mother was afraid I was having another nervous breakdown. Then I thought, I'm going to see what Dorothy has to say. Now, Dorothy Cunningham was an astrologer and a card reader. Dorothy lived in a one-bedroom apartment over a garage just north of Ingersoll on 39th Street. She was my advisor on all things. So I went over to Dorothy's and I walked up the creaky wooden stairs to her magical place. It's the kind of place where beaded curtains separate the main living room from the bedroom. Her walls were painted purple swirls, and there were little symbols of the moon and the sun and the stars all over. And I'm going to ask her about joining a presidential campaign. Well, Dorothy didn't think that was odd at all. So she said, well, let's see what the cards say. And she told me to shuffle the cards, and we held hands and prayed to Mother, Father, God to, reveal thy will. And I was told to put 7 cards face down, which I did. And then it was Dorothy's turn to interpret what the cards were saying about this decision. She flipped over the first one, bam. Ooh. She said, well, that's not so good. Well, we have 6 more to go. She flipped over the next one. Ooh, now there's a challenge. Okay, third one. Well, that's the card of death. But, says Dorothy, death card can mean rebirth. So I thought, well, phew, okay. Anyway, it kept going like that until we got to the last card, and she turned it over, bam. Deep breath, and Dorothy says, well, if you do decide to quit your job and go to work on this campaign, it will work out eventually. Well, that's all I needed, eventually. Okay, all right, let's go. So that's what I did. I quit my job as a Des Moines Register columnist, best job in the whole world, and went off to join a Harkin presidential campaign that ended in 6 weeks. Bam. Okay, so there's that. All right, now what am I going to do? Well, I better sell my house, and I can't really afford Montessori tuition and a mortgage when I'm kind of unemployed. So I sold the house, bam. I started Central Iowa's first news and information internet site in 1992. And I didn't have too long to figure out that there was, well, let's just say I'm a little ahead of my time sometimes. Anyway, I tried various entrepreneurial things. And some worked out and some didn't. Then we're entering the phase of the new millennium. The year 2000 was approaching. And that is when I reconnected with the man who is now my husband. And things started looking up. Yeah, yes. Richard Gilbert talked me into, well, he's talking into, that's probably not the right term. He suggested that I would make a good Vistage chair. Well, what's a Vistage chair? Well, a Vistage chair works with CEOs and, gives them counsel and facilitates meetings once a month. And I thought, well, I wonder how they'd feel about Dorothy being on my speed dial. But Richard saw something in me that I certainly didn't see in myself. And so I decided to go through chair training and prove him wrong. And turns out, I discovered in chair training that to be a business coach, the best thing to do is to ask a lot of questions. They don't want your answers. They want you to ask them questions. And I can do that. So I passed chair training, I became a chair, I built a group in Annapolis, Maryland, and Baltimore, and then ultimately Chicago, where we lived. We retired as Visti's chairs right before COVID hit in 2020, and that's when we moved back to Des Moines. I'm real glad to be back in Des Moines, actually. Yeah. But I will say, those 20 years, 30 years of not living here, I wouldn't change at all. I was able to live on the Chesapeake Bay. I learned to sail. I started doing paintings of people's boats on nautical charts, and it's rather amazing what people will pay to have a painting of their boat on a nautical chart. Some people have too much money. Anyway, where am I going with this? Advice. Okay, that's where I'm going with this. Had I not made this decision 30 years ago, I wouldn't know what it would be like to hold the helm of a sailboat hundreds of miles offshore in a midnight watch when everything is black except for the stars sparkling in the sky. I did that. And all you can hear is the sound of the boat moving through the water and a little bit of the flapping of the sails. That's just one thing I can't imagine not having experienced at this point. I did a number of entrepreneurial things. I think the tough times I had financially, I actually know what it was like to be living near the poverty level and have your refrigerator conk out. That kind of feeling of knowing, experiencing what it's like to be living that close to the edge, I think was a real gift for me. It deepened my empathy. It made poverty more than just an issue. It made it real. And again, that was a real gift. So, I'm not here to advise you, especially after you've heard that story. But I do think when we are faced with difficult decisions, if you ask yourself 2 questions, it might be helpful. The first question is, what's the worst thing that could happen if I take this path? And the next question is, what would I be missing in life if I didn't take this path? So for me, I have no regrets, other than maybe coming up here tonight. No. Seriously, I have no regrets. I would make the same decision that I did 30 years ago for all of the reasons I just told you. We don't know what is going to happen. We don't know what's going to happen if we don't make changes. It's all unknown. Maybe it's just all in the cards. Bam!